Good morning and welcome to History of Interiors. Today we will be discussing the Spanish decorative and architectural styles. Much like in France, this style is going to shift and change over time, but elements of it will continue to be seen throughout Spanish history. So on this slide, you see an image that really encapsulates the look of this Spanish style. So you see a lot of arches as well as the tiled roofs and kind of stucco or stone sides, as well as some carvings above the arches. But in general, this style is going to be what we're going to see throughout the Iberian Peninsula. All right, so to give you a little bit of background into Spain at this time, you are seeing the influence of the Moors, who are from Africa. They followed Islam as their main religion, so we're going to see a lot of Islam influence on all of Spanish architecture, not just religious buildings, but that idea that, you can't depict a person's face, and so you're going to have a lot of Arabesque influence here. And so obviously being Islamic, they believed in Allah and the Quran and its teachings, and they followed the Prophet Muhammad. And most importantly, the Moors were tent dwellers. So these tents would have a very plain exterior, but an incredibly ornate interior. However, they were very nomadic, so as ornate as the interior was, it had to be able to be packed quickly and moved. This nomadic tent concept would continue to influence Spanish architecture, so we're going to see a lot of their buildings reflecting that tent style look because of how commonplace these were in Spain at the time. But remember, just because you're hearing the word tent does not mean that it is simple or anything like that. On the inside, these tents were incredibly ornate. So in this image, you can see the tent dwellers and kind of the community that they would have set up and lived in. So these are large tents. They would have allowed a lot of people to live in that one smaller area. But they could very easily be taken down, packed up, and moved around Spain. So some more background to consider centers around the conflict between the Moorish people and the royal family of Spain. So in 1492, King Ferdinand of Aragon and Queen Isabella of Castile defeated the Moors. They drove them out of Spain. And if you recognize King Ferdinand of Aragon and Queen Isabella, they are the parents of Catherine of Aragon, who was King Henry's first wife. So majorly influential in the world as a whole. Additionally, being the two most prominent royal families in Spain, their marriage actually unified Spain. So it suddenly came from multiple families in that dynastic style to being a unified kingdom. Additionally, we saw the discovery of the Americas. So this established an empire on which the sun never set. So they were able to go and colonize in a lot of Latin America. And this brought back many riches, which influenced the art. So just in the way that Portugal is discovering Brazil at this moment in time, King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella, as well as the rest of their royal lineage, are also discovering major silver deposits throughout Latin America. Therefore, they're getting a lot of money and wealth, which is not to undermine the cruelty by which the native people of those countries were exposed to when this colonization was happening. In order for Spain to get rich, it did mean, unfortunately, that many, many others were hurt. However, this did allow Spain to grow its wealth and influence the arts, as well as sharing their influence with the rest of Europe. All right, so a little bit more background. Spain had a very long history of unrest. It traded hands almost constantly. There was lots of conquering and being conquered, dating back past the Crusades. So remember, you have two really strong world religions building and gaining ground in Spain, especially near this time. So you have Roman Catholicism trying to maintain a stronghold on Spain as part of the Holy Roman Empire. You also have the Moors coming over and wanting to grow the Islamic faith. So both of those are going to butt heads quite a bit, and there's going to be a lot of unrest there. Which is why it's so monumental when King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella finally defeat the Moors. Not only is that a win for Spain, it is also a win for the Christian religion as well. So many people backed and supported them because of that. Additionally, Spain has a very mountainous terrain, which prevented transportation, communication, and unification. So, like I said, it was almost more of a city-state type feudal system in which there were multiple royal families, which is why King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella marrying ended up uniting the country in a way that it had not been united before. You also see early emotional personalities, so temperamental to the point of violence, especially within those royal families. There was lots of warring going on. And then lastly, we know the term joie de vivre from France, which was simply to mean that the joy of living is what that translates to. And that concept was not unique to France. We also see it here in Spain, where they determined that the joy of living is more important than earning a living, meaning that the way you live your life should be more important than the money owned or money earned during that time. Which once again is kind of rich coming from a group of what will end up being very wealthy Spanish people thanks to their colonization of Latin America. But for them, that lifestyle is more laid back in general than we're going to see elsewhere in the world. So, even though they accomplished quite a bit, eventually the Spanish Empire would fall with the defeat of the Spanish Armada by the English. Corruption of the treasury was what ultimately resulted in that downfall. So remember, they were pulling in silver from Latin America. They had so many riches, and yet, because that treasury was not left secure, it ended up contributing to the downfall of the Spanish Empire. And then we have the Inquisition, which occurred to maintain the church's power. So remember, two main world religions really fighting to have control over Spain, and the Inquisition would occur to help the Roman Catholic Church maintain its ground in Spain. However, this did squelch creativity and prevent reforms. So we're going to see a lot of issue with that as we move forward. The English victory ended up allowing Protestantism to spread, which really hurt the Catholic Church, obviously. And it also allowed English and Dutch colonial development. So for as far-reaching and as expansive as Spain's empire once was, when Spain fell apart, so did most everything it colonized, and that allowed the English and the Dutch to really gain ground. Okay, so now we're going to break down some highlights of Spanish history. So in the 15th century, that's when we see the height of Spain's achievement. The conquistadors made Spain the political power in Europe. So that's going to be Columbus, Malagan, Balboa, and De Soto, who are going to really make Spain a world power. Portugal will also get involved with this, which is why you see Portugal take ground in Brazil, but Spain is really going to get most everything else in Latin America and be one of the most broad empires during this time. In the 16th century, England challenges Spain and ultimately defeats the Spanish Armada in 1588. And Spain will never fully recover from this attack, so it definitely brings Spain to its knees and keeps them there. All right, now we have a good understanding of the history, so we're going to move on to geography. Spain is located on the Iberian Peninsula right next to Portugal, and this borders the Mediterranean Sea, and it comes down to meet Morocco. So Morocco is where the Moors are going to come from. So they are going to immigrate to Spain, and that's going to influence them quite a bit. And the Moors had a much more nomadic lifestyle, which is where we get that tent concept from. All right, so moving on to the arts. Spain was really always under the influence of some other country, more so than any other European nation. While we are going to see a Spanish style really develop, it's going to be a combination of most other countries' styles, more so than being a relic of their own society. And then you can also see several examples of politics influencing the arts. Remember that as Spain was conquering all of these places and gaining dramatic amounts of wealth, it was all going to that royal family and the nobles, and therefore they're going to use the arts as a way of protecting their political interest. The terrain and repeated invasions prevented a similarity of art form in all parts of Spain, so we're going to see a very varied form of art coming about. You're going to see a lot of military art as well as ecclesiastical art, both of which are very much supported by the idea of politics influencing art. You're also going to see a fair bit of intellectual art come into play. So we have several periods in which we break down the Hispanic style. So from 700 to 1400 CE, we're going to see the Moorish style. From 1200 to 1600 CE, we see the Mudéjar style, which is the transitional style from the Moorish Gothic and Italian Renaissance. From 1100 to 1550 CE, we see the Romanesque and Gothic styles make an appearance just alongside the Romanesque and Gothic styles that we've studied before. And then in 1450 to 1550, we see the Plateresco, which means the silversmith. So remember, massive amounts of silver coming in from Latin America. From 1500 to 1650, we see the Desornamentado, which is the Spanish Renaissance. From 1600 to 1750 CE, we have the Churrigueresco style, which is the Spanish Baroque and Rococo. And then in 1700 to 1815, we're going to see foreign influences. So they often copied French and English designs. All right, so now we're going to go a little bit deeper into some of the most important periods. So at first you have the Plateresco, which celebrated the skill of the silversmith and brings precious metals in from Latin America. Then you have the Desornamentado, which is just a plain exterior. It means without ornament, and it's a very severe style developed by Herrera, who studied under Michelangelo during Philip II's reign. Then you're going to have the Churrigueresco. I apologize so much for my pronunciation. I do not speak Spanish, but this falls under the architect Churriguero, and it introduced elaborate ornamentation and curved lines. All right, so now we're going to shift our focus to some architecture. So the province of Castile is a section of Spain, and it has more existing castles than any other country, which would have been incredibly important architecture to build, especially when you're constantly facing invasions. Then you see Moorish influence, which is actually going to be very reminiscent of the Byzantine style that we have studied before. And from here, you're going to see the development of the Moorish arch or the horseshoe arch, as well as a really plain exterior. We're also going to see the multifoil arch or a scalloped arch, as well as a minaret, and we'll discuss these more in the coming slides. So on this slide, you can see one of those existing Castile castles, and the main element that I want to talk to you about on this slide are the embattlements. So that's what you can see here. They almost look like reverse dentils, except they're much, much larger. And these served a very specific purpose. So each of these that stood tall made it easy for someone who is defending the castle to duck behind should they see an arrow coming their way. However, the little gaps in between made it easy for them to turn and shoot an arrow out at an oncoming intruder. All right, so this is another piece of Spanish architecture. So you can see the use of the arches throughout. This one is clearly made out of stone, so it's not going to have that same stucco look like we have seen before. And then it also features a minaret, which I believe is this part here, but we'll have a better picture one in just a moment, and I'll go over what that is on the next slide. All right, so on this slide, you can very clearly see a minaret, and the minaret is a tall, slender tower. It's typically part of a mosque or other building that is associated with the Muslim faith. And it contains a balcony from which a muezzin calls Muslims to prayer. So remember, in the Muslim faith, they pray daily, multiple times a day. And this would have been the tower through which someone would have told the Muslims in the area that it was time to pray. All right, so here you can see an image of a cusp horseshoe arch. So the cusp are going to be all of these little scallops that go around it. And the horseshoe arch is a really important arch for the Spanish style. It's something that we're going to see throughout the Spanish styles. And it essentially makes the shape of a horseshoe, right? So it bows out and then comes back in at the top. Very similar to that onion dome that we saw before, actually, except it doesn't come quite to as sharp of a point at the top. It's more rounded. All right, so there are 4 pieces of architecture that we're going to dive into today. We have the Alhambra in Granada, the Alcazar in Segovia, the Great Mosque in Cordova, which also features the first freestanding staircase, and El Escorial. All right, on this slide you can see an image of the Alhambra in Granada, Spain. The Alhambra in Granada is distinct among medieval palaces for its sophisticated planning, complex decorative programs, and its many enchanting gardens and fountains. Its intimate spaces are built at a human scale that visitors find elegant and inviting. It contains 1 mile of walls and 30 towers of varying sizes, which enclose this city within a city. Access was restricted to 4 main gates. The Alhambra's nearly 26 acres include structures with 3 distinct purposes: a residence for the ruler and close family, the citadel, and the Alcabaza barracks for the elite guard who were responsible for the safety of the complex, and an area called a medina, or city, near the Puerta del Vino, or wine gate, where court officials lived and worked. The different parts of the complex are connected by paths, gardens, and gates, but each part of the complex could be blocked in the event of a threat. The exquisitely detailed structures, with their highly ornate interior spaces and patios, contrast with the plain walls of the fortress exterior. The Alhambra's most celebrated structures are the three original royal palaces. These are the Comares Palace, the Palace of the Lions, and the Pardo Palace, each of which was built during the 14th century. A large fourth palace was later begun by Christian ruler Carlos V. Alright, so on this slide you can see an image of the Palacio de los Leones, or the Palace of the Lions. This is specifically the Court of the Lions. The Palace of the Lions stands next to the Comares Palace, but should be considered an independent building. The two structures were connected after Granada fell to the Christians. Muhammad V built the Palace of the Lions' most celebrated feature in 14th century, a fountain with a complex hyaluronic system consisting of a marble basin on the backs of 12 carved stone lions situated at the intersection of two water channels that form a cross in the rectilinear courtyard. An arched covered patio encircles the courtyard and displays fine stucco carvings held up by a series of slender columns. Two decorative pavilions protrude into the courtyard on an east-west axis, accentuating the royal spaces behind them. To the west, the Sala de los Microbes may have functioned as an antechamber and was near the original entrance to the palace. It takes its name from the intricately carved system of brackets called muquarnas that hold up the vaulted ceilings. Across the courtyard to the east is the Sala de los Reyes, the Hall of Kings, an elongated space divided into sections using a series of arches leading up to a vaulted Marquenas ceiling. The room has multiple alcoves, some with an unobstructed view of the courtyard, but with no known function. This room contains paintings on the ceiling representing courtly lifestyle. The images were first painted on tanned sheepskin in the tradition of miniature painting. They use bright colors and fine details and are attached to the ceiling rather than painting on it. There are two other halls in the Palace of the Lions on the northern and southern ends. They are the Sala de los Hermanas, the Hall of the Two Sisters, and the Hall of Abencerraras, the Hall of the Ambassadors. Both were residential apartments with rooms on the second floor. Each also have large domed rooms stupendously decorated with carved and painted stucco in Marquenas forms with elaborate and varying star motifs. So as you can see here in the middle, you have that fountain with the lions on it, which is where this specific courtyard gets its name. And this is another view in which you can see those, the pavilions that protrude out into the space. So this is running in the east-west direction, and you can tell how truly intricate these are. So you have that arabesque patterning seen throughout, and it's a very, very elaborate form of decoration, though being just very patterned. You don't have that use of imagery of representative imagery. You just have imagery that is associated with pattern and that arabesque style. And here you can see that arabesque style in even more detail. You can tell that it almost looks like lace or like a honeycomb with how absolutely fine those details are. They're small and rich and intricate, and they would have taken a lot of time to create this. So it would have been incredibly expensive, but ultimately incredibly beautiful as well. All right, so on this slide, you're seeing an image of the Alcazar Castle, and that is located in Segovia, which is in the Castile and Leon regions in Spain. This fortress is a World Heritage Site, and it has served as many things. So it was originally designed as a fortress, but has served as a royal palace, a state prison, and a royal artillery college, and a military academy since then. It is currently used as a museum and a military archives building. And here's just another image of the Alcazar. So you can see all of those minarets as well as the embattlements that we spoke about before. And if this looks a little bit familiar to you, it is largely believed to be the castle that inspired Walt Disney as he was designing Cinderella's castle. So while that castle was incredibly simple on the outside, they did bring a lot of decoration inside. So here you're seeing one of the paintings on the walls. It was filled with paintings, and this one definitely still serves that trompe-l'oeil purpose. It's fooling the eye a little bit, intending to make it look like people are standing there waiting in line to see the king or something along those sorts. And obviously these are not real people and they are not actually standing there, but it gave the illusion of a crowd in a room that wouldn't have been crowded. Alright, so one thing that is important to note about Spain is just how formal they are in their interiors as well as in their everyday lives. And you can really see that quite clearly in this room. You have the dramatic draperies on the walls, all of the gilding and patterning of the ceiling in that coffered ceiling look. But we can also see some furniture that we should be able to recognize as well as some other elements. So you have these like Dante style chairs, if you'll recall back to when we spoke about those. You can still see the reminiscence of some pointed arches, which definitely have some Gothic influence. But yes, in general, just one thing to note is just how formal these interiors are. You can see, massive amounts of detail being spread throughout. So here's a closer view of that ceiling. So you can see the beautiful coffer. It's not done in a way that we have really seen it done before, but definitely the use of gold throughout makes this look very high-end and expensive. And you can also notice the use of the statuary. I believe these were intended to be the kings and queens and noblemen, but they definitely have a lot of detail on those as well. This was the throne area. As you can tell, they're up on a pedestal, signifying that they would have been the most important people in the room. The backs on these chairs are incredibly tall, but you can also see the Gothic influence in the back. So you definitely see all of those spires, almost a rose window shape here, though very simplified, the pointed arch. So yes, just remember, this harkens back to that Gothic period. In this image, you're seeing a bedroom in the Alcazar castle. So notice the really fine draperies hanging down around the beds, and the other thing is all of the tapestries on the wall. They're very detailed, very fine finishes, and so they definitely would have been a means of displaying wealth during this time. So this is the Alcazar Castle of Seville, Spain, so different than the one that we were just looking at. But you can still see a lot of the Spanish architecture that we have been talking about mentioned. So you've got these arches that were important to their architectural style, but you can also see some added detail here in the use of the different types of stone alternating with the stucco, giving it a really distinctively Spanish look. And this is another view of that castle that is in Seville, and you can see the use of the really fine tracery up here as well as throughout. And you can also see the use of the cusped horseshoe arches. Once again, both of these things are pretty distinctive to Spain and show a lot of influence from the Moorish period. So here's an interior view from the atrium in that castle in Seville. You'll notice that the tracery continues towards the inside, and we are seeing that horseshoe arch shape. This one's not going to be as pronounced as some of the ones that we're going to look at in a moment, but you can still definitely see that horseshoe shape throughout, as well as that use of tracery mixed with that stucco or plaster look. So it kind of gives some contrast between these really detailed patterns and a much more mild affront. All right, so this is another look at the Castle of Seville, and here you can see the horseshoe arches, and now you can really tell why we call them horseshoe arches. They definitely bow in quite a bit towards the bottom of the arch, but you still get that really rounded top on them. These obviously show a lot of tracery and a lot of arabesque design elements. You also have the shell motif sitting above. But yes, lots of definite ornament here going on. And then this is just an exterior image, so you can see the use of the orange color as well as some other more pastel but also bright colors as well throughout. You can see a mild horseshoe arch here, and you're also seeing a lot of those Spanish style double columns that we've looked at before. All right, so now we're going to start a conversation about El Escorial in Madrid. So this was commissioned by Emperor Charles V, who said that this religious establishment should be built so that he could be buried beside his wife Isabella of Portugal, and his son Philip II would undertake the task of building this, and he assigned Juan Bautista de Toledo as the royal architect. This is located in Madrid, as I mentioned, next to the Guadarrama Mountains, and it was named the San Lorenzo el Real del Escorial after St. Lawrence of Rome, who was a martyr of supposed Hispanic origin and was intended to serve as the royal pantheon. Tradition also holds, however, that this was dedicated to San Lorenzo de la Victoria in fulfillment of a vow made by Philip II to atone for the destruction of a church dedicated to St. Lawrence at the Battle of San Quentin in 1557. Located near Madrid, San Lorenzo de el Escorial is an imposing architectural complex that is arguably the most ambitious monument constructed during the Renaissance in Spain. Construction started in 1563 after King Philip II of Spain decided to commission a funerary monument for his father, the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V. But Philip II desired an even more complicated structure that would also function as a palace and a monastery. By the time construction ended in 1584, the complex included not only these, but a church and a college as well. The library was also added in 1592. The project was so complex that it took more than a decade to complete, and approximately 1,000 people worked on it during its peak construction period. El Escorial is often described as severe or somber in appearance, with a symmetrically organized plan and a largely unornamented exterior. In its day, this was remarkable because it broke with architectural styles popular in the Iberian Peninsula, including the highly decorative plateresque style, which was influenced by the ornate designs of silverwork. The facade of the University of Salamanca, for instance, is a veritable feast for the eyes, with floral imagery, twisting vines, and medallions decorating the surface. El Escorial has none of this elaborate ornamentation. The massive complex has 4 stories, with large rectangular towers at each corner. There are 11 courtyards, as well as 3 smaller service courts and several gardens. Classical orders of columns punctuate the exterior with massive simple Doric columns on the facade, While there is little decoration or figural ornamentation, the west facade that marks the entrance to the courtyard of the kings displays St. Lawrence above the royal coat of arms, and the basilica's facade includes 6 Old Testament kings towering above the first level. So here you can see another image of the El Escorial in Madrid, and this was a really important symbol of imperial Spain. So Philip encouraged those visiting him at court to journey to El Escorial. One particularly fascinating example dates to 1584 when Japanese nobles and their Portuguese Jesuit guide visited Philip II in Madrid, at which point the Spanish king brought them to El Escorial to delight in his project and hopefully impress them with its magnificence. Apparently it worked, as one record states that the Japanese nobles claimed it was so magnificent a thing whose like we have never seen or expected to see. One can imagine that the severe classicizing style combined with a grid plan helped to establish Philip II as akin to the great Roman emperors of the past, as well as a formidable imperial ruler with refined taste during the Renaissance. On this slide, you see a bird's eye image of the El Escorial. So the original layout of the complex was on a grid plan laid out by Juan Bautista de Toledo, a student of Michelangelo who aided in the construction of St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. A grid plan suggests order and balance, clarity and unity. At El Escorial, some suggest that the grid plan possibly relates to the grille upon which St. Lawrence was martyred. Most Spanish cities on the Iberian Peninsula did not use a grid plan, in large part because they were older cities whose streets were already laid out. However, Philip II issued edicts in the 16th century that affected the construction of towns and cities in the Spanish viceroyalties that specified grid plans. This suggests a broader trend in Spain and its territories during the Renaissance to a return of cities laid out clearly and consistently, a nod to ancient Roman building practices. A second architect, Juan de Herrera, completed the project after Toledo's death in 1567. Herrera reportedly met with Philip II often to consult on the project, and the king appointed him as the royal architect towards the end of the 1570s. Herrera was known for his severe classicism, which was influenced by the Italian architectural forms and architects such as Solero, Vignola, and Romano, whose work he observed on his travels to Italy. His design for El Escorial may have been especially influenced by Romano's Palazzo Te in Mantua, and also incorporated classicizing architectural elements. El Escorial's severe style is sometimes referred to as Herrera-esque in honor of Herrera. So here you can see an image of those exterior courtyard areas. So you can see that it was really simple and severe. You're not seeing a lot of ornamentation going on this exterior. However, it was definitely well laid out in a city-like plan. While the exterior is restrained in its decoration, many areas of the interior are elaborately decorated. Inside the basilica, or the monastery, so what you're seeing here, more depictions of kings and saints await visitors. Frescoes adorn many of the surfaces, such as the walls of the library. Despite its highly decorative qualities, El Escorial's interior is harmonious, with the ornamentation carefully planned to create a visually unified space. Artists from different parts of Europe were hired to adorn the interior. Federico Zuccaro and Pellegrino Tibaldi were 2 Italian painters paid to complete frescoes and other paintings. Tibaldi's Martyrdom of St. Lawrence on the main altarpiece in the basilica showcases the influence of Michelangelo, with its grandiose figures displaying a well-defined musculature. We also find works by Claudio Cuccello, Luca Giordano, and El Greco. The latter produced the Martyrdom of St. Maurice for El Escorial in 1582, but Philip II apparently rejected it on claims that the foreground figures were the focus of the composition. So the martyrdom of St. Lawrence is right here. And obviously this would have been a really important figure, as this was who this basilica is dedicated to. During Philip II's reign, El Escorial became house to many artworks, including some by Titian and others by Flemish painters like Hieronymus Bosch. The king eventually owned the roughly 26 paintings by Bosch, many of which hung in El Escorial, including the artist's famous Garden of Earthly Delights. Works that formed part of the royal collection in El Escorial eventually entered the Prado Museum's collections. So on this slide, you can see the ceiling of the library in El Escorial, and you'll notice that it is a barrel vault, so keeping that kind of Romanesque aspect continuing throughout. But you'll also notice the use of frescoes throughout. Look at how brightly colored they are and how detailed and ornamented these interiors were. Alright, so now we're going to move on to discussing the interiors that were popular throughout Spain. So the first thing that you'll notice is tile floors. Sometimes these were patterned, sometimes they were not, but they're really nice floor pieces. You also see a lot of wood beams being used, especially to support things, but also for decoration. Then you can see a tiled dado or wainscot, as well as plaster walls and great use of tapestries throughout. So we saw that in the bedroom scene that we studied before, how they would use the tapestries. And I know I've said it many times, but I just want you to be reminded as to why they would have used tapestries rather than just painting directly on the walls. And that's because it provides that extra layer of insulation. So you have the wall, and then you have a gap of air, and then the tapestry. And therefore you have the extra layer that keeps either heat in or heat out, depending on the season. We're also going to see the use of niches become quite popular. We saw these before in Greece and Rome, and we're going to see them again here. You also have incredibly deep window reveals, so those are set back quite a bit. You have an estrado, which is just like a raised platform or a stage. That's going to be the estrado. And then lastly, you're going to see the horseshoe arch, which we've mentioned a couple of times. So what we are seeing here is an interpretation of the cusp arch, which is known as the stalactite. And this actually is intended to look like you're in a cave or something, so the cusp aren't very clean. But in general, you can still see that horseshoe kind of shape with the cusp on it. And here you can see that horseshoe arch once again. Notice that this one is highly decorated, which was not uncommon, but you can tell by the shape of it, and I'm sorry, I'm going to go ahead and erase that because I know it got in the way. But you can see from the shape of it why it's called a horseshoe arch. So one thing you'll notice, despite the overall city planning as well as some of the other aspects that we've studied be very much influenced by the ancient cultures of the past, they don't actually adopt any of the full orders. In fact, they kind of reinterpret them into their own thing. So here you can see that use of a Corinthian capital, but you can actually see the multi-foiled arches here. So this is not quite a cusp arch because they're not really small enough to be cusp, but it's going to be like a trefoil type arch. And then in this example, you can see the tiled dado, so just that wainscot. And once again, you can see all of the tracery and truly intricate details. So this here is the dado. But all of the really intricate details, definitely influenced by that Moorish and Islamic style. You can also see here, though it's very slight, these arches definitely have that horseshoe shape to them. And they are still pretty influenced by the Gothic style. You could see that they kind of come to a point. But mostly they're definitely the horseshoe arches, which we associate almost exclusively with Spain. All right, so the main term that I want you to look at here are the alternating voussures. And so that's just going to be this striped pattern. You can see that it has like a red tone and then a natural tone, back to the red tone and the natural tone. So that striped look, it creates a lot of movement throughout the space, and that's termed an alternating voussure. This image is also an interior view of the Great Mosque at Cordoba, and I want to go over that building a little bit because we didn't get to it earlier. So, following the overthrow of his family, which was the Umayyads in Damascus by the incoming Abbasids, Prince Abad al-Rahman the first escaped to southern Spain, and once there, he established control over almost all of the Iberian Peninsula and attempted to recreate the grandeur of Damascus in his new capital, Cordoba. He sponsored elaborate building programs, promoted agriculture, and even imported fruit trees and other plants from his former home. Orange trees still stand in the courtyard of the mosque at Cordoba, a beautiful if bittersweet reminder of the Umayyad exile. The image that you're seeing here comes from the hypostyle hall, and the building itself was expanded over 200 years. It comprised of a large hypostyle prayer hall. Hypostyle means filled with columns, a courtyard with a fountain in the middle, an orange grove, and a covered walkway circling the courtyard, and a minaret, which is the tower used to call the faithful to prayer. The minaret is now encased in a square tapered bell tower. The expansive prayer hall seems magnified by its repeated geometry. It is built with the recycled ancient Roman columns from which sprout a striking combination of two-tiered symmetrical arches formed of stone and red brick. So here you can once again see that alternating voussure. So you've got that kind of pattern going on here. Looks like it's broken into separate chunks. And this is the mihrab, which is the focal point of the prayer hall at the Great Mosque at Cordoba. And it's a famous horseshoe arched mihrab or prayer niche. A mihrab is used in a mosque to identify the wall that faces Mecca, the birthplace of Islam in what is now Saudi Arabia. This is practical as Muslims face towards Mecca during their daily prayers. The mihrab in the Great Mosque of Cordoba is framed by an exquisitely decorated arch, behind which is an unusually large space, the size of a small room. Gold tesserae, small pieces of glass with gold and colored backing, create dazzling combination of dark blues, reddish browns, yellows, and golds that form the intricate calligraphic bands and metal motifs that adorn the arch. So in this image, you can once again see the horseshoe arch as well as the geometric patterns around it. On this slide, you can see an image of that estrado, just like we saw in the throne room before. This is the platform or stage of sorts. This one is serving some type of like altar or prayer space, but it really just means that the floor is raised in that area. Here you can see the tiled dado as well as the deep reveals. So the reveal just means that it is buried really deep, recessed back into the wall. And you can also see the tiled dado. It's very heavily patterned here. Though the pattern is more simplified than what we have seen in other spaces. But that deep reveal just means, like I said, that that door or window is recessed really far into the wall. So now we're going to start our conversation about furniture. So the first thing to note is that they traditionally used walnut and mahogany, which were discovered in the West Indies, and they imported them in. Writing desks were incredibly popular, such as the Vargueno, which was a writing surface that had a matching base, and the Papelera, which is only a chest with no base, which makes it incredibly portable. So on this slide, you're able to see the trestle table with a metal Fyodor stretcher. So this part in the middle, that's the stretcher. And you can also see the use of a Flemish scroll here. So we've gone over the Flemish scroll before. It's kind of that S shape that you're seeing kind of in this area. And so that's why, sorry, I forgot to click. They're the Flemish scroll feet. So like I said, that S shape that's right there. And then you can also see the Papelera resting on the trestle table with clavated legs and a Fyodor. So this up here is the Papelera, so that portable writing desk. And then you can also see the trestle table below, so you can see that it has the stretchers. And then the end part here, so this whole section, that leg type thing, that's going to be your trestle. And then you can see the clavated legs, so they're turned. On this slide, you can see the Vargueno. So all of this would have been a single piece of furniture. And it serves as a writing desk. So this top part would have folded down to become a writing desk. And it is permanently attached to the base. So it's not portable like the Papelera. Here you can see an arca. And you can also see, like I mentioned, the arca, which is basically just what they would use as a chest for storage. So here's another image of the Vargueno so that you can see how that works. So you can tell that it looks almost like an armoire when it is set up, but then you just fold out that little piece and it becomes a writing desk. Here is that one that we looked at the drawing of. So it's still a Vargueno. It is still connected to this table. At least this one, sorry, looking at the one on the right, that's a Vargueno. And you can compare that to the Papelera that is on the left. So you can tell that this one is just sitting on the table. It's not actually connected to it. Though they both have a very similar look and serve the same purpose, it's just that the Papelera on the left is portable. You could set that on any table, whereas the Vargueno on the right would have had to move the whole piece in order to move it. So now we're going to look at some chairs. The ladder back chair was quite popular during this time period, so it had a really pronounced top rail usually and a rush or rope style seat. The Dante chair, which we saw before in one of our interior images, sometimes that would have either leather or velvet upholstery, and it often featured nail heads. We also see the Sedia chair, or the Sillon de Frailero, which was for the friar or monk. So here you can see a Barcelona or Majorcan ladder back chair. So you can tell it would have had that really pronounced top rail, but it gets its name from the look of it, right? You've got the rungs of a ladder, the sides of it. It's a very straight up and down chair. You're not saying, like we looked at in the later France styles, the splayed Clismos legs are not involved here at all. And here's just another image. These are the Chambrana chairs specifically, but you can definitely still see that rush or rope-like seat and the ladder back with the pronounced upper rail. So this is a wainscot chair with an arabesque and yeseria, um, pattern to it. So you'll see all of those really arabesque flowing lines with a lot of floral elements in them. The wainscot chair, which is the same as what we've discussed numerous times, sits up against the wall, looks like the wainscot. But once again, you can see the really straight lines in all of these pieces as like the main structure of them, but you get a lot of curved lines and a lot of movement in the decoration. All right, so there's two terms that we're going to look at on this slide. First, you're going to see the artesanata. So this is going to be the back side once you fold down that writing desk, either on a papelera or on a vergüenza. And so you can see all of these little things that look like poles, and that's exactly what they would have been. So it gives you some storage, but most importantly, it's a type of woodworking and decoration. So all of this together is termed the artesanora. And then you also have the Guatemala. I'm so sorry. Starting over. Guatemacelaria. I apologize. And this is just work on leather, so you can see all of the embellishment that's being added to the leather elements of these chairs, and that's the Guatemacelaria. So two of the main materials that they used were leather and clavos, so you can tell that these chairs, like the seats and backs, are made of leather. And then you can also see what looks like nail heads, and that's going to be the clavos. So this was a very popular way of decorating the chairs. And you can go over this slide as part of your review, so you can see the Moorish horseshoe arch. You can see the tile patterns. This is the vergüenza, this is the ladder back chair, you have a trestle table, and like I said, feel free to screenshot this image, go over it. I think it will be helpful to you, but all of these terms you'll see again in your vocabulary sheet. So moving on to our next piece of furniture, we see the chest, which is also termed as the arca. And we're also going to look at tables, and they have splayed legs and clavated legs or turned legs, each of which we've seen before, but here they're going to be done in a uniquely Spanish style. You also see the trestle legs as well as Salamonica legs or spiral legs, and metal stretchers, which are also known as a fiador. You also see torture, which is a metal candle holder. So torch, candle, it starts to make sense, and it's an easy way for you to remember that vocabulary word. So here are some examples of arcas, and you can tell that they open just like a chest would. And they provide an ample amount of storage to whoever is using it. You can see that the tracery that was popular within their interiors is also featured on their furnishings. Highly detailed, highly ornamented, especially with geometric as well as arabesque style patterns. On this slide, you can see an example of clavated legs, so you'll just remember that those are made by turning the piece of wood, and I'm sure you've seen videos of the process before. But essentially you just have the same pattern as though it's a molding. It's cut all the way around in the round, and you have the same pattern all the way down. You can also see the table with splayed legs, as well as that metal stretcher. So this part is the stretcher, that V in the middle. And then the reason that we're calling these splayed legs, they're not splayed in the same way that the Greek klysmos legs are, but they do lean out, so they do form a more triangular shape rather than being straight up and down. This is a trestle table. We've seen trestle tables before, but the main thing to note here is the use of the metal stretcher rather than a wood stretcher that runs straight across. And that metal stretcher, once again, would have been termed the fiador. So there's quite a bit of ornamentation as you've been able to gather throughout this lecture. So you see some rustification. Sorry, I'm going to click through these real quick. And then you also have the yeseria, which is that low relief lace-like plaster work. We've seen that throughout as well, also sometimes referred to as tracery. You also see the salisite work, which, if you'll remember, is that one that looks more like a cave. It's that cusp pattern, but it's not quite clean. You also see a lot of leather work. So you have rapus, which is like embossed leather, guadalmelaceria, which is the painted leather, and the tooled or gilded leather. As we saw a moment ago, you also see a lot of nail heads being used, mostly because metal work and grill work are quite popular. So you have damascening, which is gold inlay in metal, becoming quite popular. And here you can see that stalactite work. So once again, you'll notice that it's a little bit more cave-like. It's not as clean as we've seen before, but it definitely provides you that similar cusp type look. It's mostly used on column capitals and arches. Here you can see the guadalmelaceria, which is that painted leather. On this side, you're seeing a more embossed leather, but the fact that it has the different coloration in it, that's how we know that it was painted. This one here, the photo just says that it is an embossed pattern, so we know that that would be closer to that rapus style, but notice the use of the nail heads and the metal work throughout as well. So this is the guadalmelaceria. So this one, it would have been embossed and then painted, which is why we still term this as the guadalmelaceria. Here is that grill work as well as the iron work that we've seen. So this would have been like on the outside of windows. You can see it in the use of a balcony here. And now we're going to move on to ornament. So as I've mentioned before, the Quran forbade the use of animal and human images, which is why they use so many floral images as well as that arabesque tracery-like pattern. Art often utilized math and geometric patterns. So you see everything is very well proportioned, and you use a lot of geometric shapes as well as the arabesque. Sometimes these were geometric, sometimes they were floral. We also see Arabic script, so while you can't put images of animals or humans, you can definitely put calligraphy that speaks about them. And since they did have a common language, it's more likely that the general population would be able to read this than had you put Latin on the outside of a church at this time. The crescent is also often used throughout. It's an Islamic motif that is similar to the popularity of a cross within the Christian church. You can also see a very stylized version of a pine cone, as well as bright jewel colors, and then the maholika ware, which is that kind of earthenware, which is an imitation of the Italian Majolica, which we studied in our Italian Renaissance lecture. So here you can see some of those geometric patterns. They used a lot of really bright color, but one thing to note is just how in proportion each element is with each other. So they're very repetitive, and you could lay each piece and it would have, all lined up. And that's mostly because of their use of math throughout. So they made sure everything lined up incredibly well, and we're going to see that again on the next slide. So once again, each of these could be easily lined up and repeated. So not only are the patterns geometric in style, they're also very repetitive and very well thought out and well formed. Here you can see the geometric patterns as well as a stylized pine cone motif. So almost like this bit here, I believe. it kind of creates the shape of a pine cone. So this is a majolica, so it's that type of tin glazed pottery, and it had several different colors that were usually very vibrant and bright, painted on a white background. The most famous of these are going to be from that Italian Renaissance period, but Spain definitely had a really influential role in that as well. And on this slide, you can see more examples. So just notice the vibrancy of the colors. They are a tin glazed pottery, so they're quite durable. Though still breakable, but the glaze isn't going to scratch necessarily as easily. They're very durable in that sense. So lastly, going on with more ornament, you have the azulejos, which are the painted wall tiles, which we've seen quite a bit throughout this lecture, especially when looking at those dados. Then you also see the artesonado, which is that Moorish woodwork, and we've also seen this before too. So this is the azulejos. You probably recognize these. They're very much a staple of Spanish architecture and Spanish style. And they could have depicted many things. So you see here, it's got that floral work. Here you have some type of royal figure, I believe. Here you have wildlife, and then this is going to be that military influence. Onto the artesonado. So remember, this was the Moorish woodwork or joinery. There's little columns. Everything is fully thought out. Sorry, my pen went a little crazy there. But you can see the use of architectural styles and orders really influencing the way that this woodwork is done. And this could be done either on a large scale or on a small scale. But one thing to note is just the true detailed aspects about it, right? Every little piece is well thought out and well placed. And like I said, this could be done on a variety of scales. So in terms of the decline of the Spanish Empire, we're going to see that England will challenge Spain, and they'll eventually defeat the Spanish Armada in 1588. This is really going to solidify England as a world power. Obviously, they had some colonies at this point, but by defeating Spain, they were able to really gain a lot of ground in the world. Spain would never fully recover from this. And so, while their style is definitely still influential, we see the influence of Spanish style throughout Latin America, as well as throughout the Iberian Peninsula. This is kind of when Spain as a world power starts to decline. They start to lose most of their influence over the colonies. And so then we have a period of foreign influence. So you can see the use of the type of legs that we saw in France. We're also going to see this style become quite popular in England. And so as Spain started to lose power, they were no longer the ones to beat. They ended up drawing a lot of visual likeness from other countries that were in Europe. So you see the influence of the neoclassical and Rococo styles here. Hispanic influence does not die, though, after England defeats Spain. We also see this throughout the world today, like I said, most commonly in areas such as Latin America. But we see the use of stucco, tiles, thick walls, leather arts, and silverwork, as well as that ladderback and caning for the chairs. All of these things we still see are incredibly popular in large swaths of the world. So, like I said, just because England was able to defeat Spain, they weren't able to ever undo all of the centuries of influence that Spain had been able to put out in the world. And so we're still going to see a lot of Hispanic and Spanish influence on styles today. So that is all that I have for you today, but I hope you have a great rest of your day and good luck with the rest of your module.